of you have ever heard of the acronym WWJD? Everybody? WWJD? You know what that stands for? WWJD? No, that's not Who Wants Jack Daniels. That is not. That's not what that stands for. It's What Would Jesus Do? WWJD. What would Jesus do? Now, that expression first became popular in the 1800s from a book written by Charles Sheldon. And Sheldon based the phrase on the works of Thomas Aquinas and his work, Imitatio Christi. In other words, imitation of Christ, meaning Christians should imitate the life of Christ. Well, WWJD became very popular again in the 1990s. There were wristbands. You may remember them. And all Christian youth in the Christian churches had wristbands, and conferences handed them out to everyone. And people went around with WWJD on their wrists. There was even a hymn written about what would Jesus do, and there was a movie made called What Would Jesus Do? So WWJD became very, very popular. But here's the question. Do you and I really want to do what Jesus did? Really? Are you sure? Well, that's our question today as we look at our pericope of Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 38. Mark 8, 27 through 38. We begin in Mark chapter 8, verse 27, where Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And here is our famous, well-known map once again.
If there's a place you gotta go, I'm the one you need to know. I'm the map. I'm the map. I'm the map.
Now, sometimes people think that Jesus spent a lot of time in Jerusalem. Actually, he did not. Most of his ministry was in Galilee, which is along the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. But then he spent some time, as we saw last week, up north in Tyre and Sidon, down in the Decapolis, and today he's going to be way up here off the map, way to the north near Mount Hermon in a region known as Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was located at the foot of Mount Hermon, which, by the way, may have been the location for the Transfiguration. But it's overlooks the north end, actually, of the Jordan River Valley and is near the source of the Jordan River, which, of course, flows down and forms the Sea of Galilee. So, on the way to Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Now, it's very common, of course, for rabbis to ask their disciples questions. In fact, you may have heard the story about how one disciple asked his rabbi, "Rabbi, why do you rabbis always speak in questions?" And the rabbi responded, "So why shouldn't we?"
Rabbi, should I have another child?
Yes, another child would be a blessing on your house.
Rabbi, should I buy a Chrysler?
Couldn't you rephrase that as an ethical question?
Is it right to buy a Chrysler?
Oh, yes. For great is the car with power steering and Dynaflow suspension.
So Jesus had a question for his disciples. "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, resuscitated back to life. Others say Elijah, again resuscitated back to life. Still others say you're one of the prophets who's come back." These are all very low views of Jesus. Did you notice that not a one of them said he's the Messiah? All kinds of ideas about who Jesus was, but nobody said he was the Messiah. So in verse 29, Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, "But what about you?" And it's an emphatic pronoun in the Greek. What about you? Who do you yourselves, who do you say that I am? Peter answered, of course, Peter, spokesperson, first to get involved in anything. And also remember that according to tradition, Mark gets his information and his story from the Apostle Peter. So Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Now, that's a correct answer, but as we go on through our lesson today, we find that Peter really didn't even understand what that meant, that Jesus was the Messiah. What's the Messiah? Messiah is a Hebrew word. You may be familiar with the Greek word. Little quiz time. What's the Greek word for Messiah? Christos, right. Christos, Christ. Messiah, Hebrew. Christ, Greek. So he was the Christos. Both words, Hebrew and Greek, mean anointed. The anointed one. Now, what's so special about being anointed? Well, it means you're the chosen one, especially chosen by God. The one, the special one, the chosen one.
How? He is the one.
The promised ideal king, the promise to King David. A king would always sit on his throne forever. The anointed one, the chosen one, the king who was going to be empowered by God to deliver his suffering people and bring in a new kingdom. Now that's correct. That's who Jesus was. He was the Messiah. He was the Christ. But notice that that understanding carries a political, nationalistic tone to it. So if you were a Jewish religious leader in the Jewish ruling circle, the Sanhedrin, or you were a Roman government official, and you heard someone being proclaimed as the new king, that would cause some concern. That would raise some eyebrows and maybe even result in being arrested by either the Jewish religious leaders or by the Roman officials. So Messiah was accurate. Messiah was true. But in its understanding of a political leader, a king, it was a very dangerous term to throw about.
This is the Messiah, the chosen one! No, he's not! An unbeliever! Persecute, kill the heretic! Leave him alone! Leave him alone! Put him down!
So in verse 30, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about it. You got it right, but don't tell anyone, because the way that term is popularly understood, it will just get me in trouble, lead me to being executed before my time, because I still have teaching and I still have ministry left to do. So in verse 31, he goes on to a new level of teaching for his disciples. Verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things. So this is a new level. They have not really come to terms with suffering and killing. What? Jesus feels it's now time to tell them that this is what's going to happen to him. He uses the term Son of Man. That was Jesus' most popular term for himself. He never called himself the Messiah. That would have been very dangerous. He just told his disciples, don't tell people I'm the Messiah. I'm the Son of Man. It's a more neutral term. It comes from the Old Testament. In the book of Psalms, it just means a human. In the book of Ezekiel, it is what God called the prophet, Son of Man. But Jesus' reference seems to be from Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, where the Son of Man was this heavenly figure who at the end time, the end of days, would come from heaven and save his persecuted people, his people who were suffering, and establish a new kingdom on earth. You can see why Jesus would use that term for himself. But he says this Son of Man, and here he's going to combine the terms in a sense in their minds, Messiah, Christ, Son of Man, must suffer. Now, he's going to use the word must twice here, and you have to understand that when Jesus uses this term must in the Greek, it means God's plan. It means God's will. It means this is what has to happen according to the will and plan of God. The Son of Man, the Messiah, must suffer. Wait, that didn't jive with their understanding of Messiah. Messiah was coming as a ruling, conquering king. Suffer? We hadn't taken that into the equation. But what Jesus is doing here is also combining the suffering servant of Isaiah with the concept of the Messiah and the Son of Man. Jesus is all of these concepts rolled into one, and I would imagine the disciples are like, huh? What? Wow, that's pretty heavy. We've never interpreted all those things in that way before. So he said, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. In other words, this is the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council made up of elders, lay members, chief priests, the chief priest and his family, and the teachers of the law, the scribes. Those three parties, you might say, made up the Sanhedrin. So he's going to be rejected by the Sanhedrin. And that he must, God's will, God's plan, God's purpose, he must be killed. The Messiah killed? That doesn't make any sense. The Son of Man, that great heavenly figure, almost a supernatural being, killed? Wouldn't you have loved to have seen the looks on the disciples' faces as Jesus tried to explain this to them? Talk about jaws dropping and trying to figure out, what? This is not the way we ever envisioned this. And after 3 days, rise again. Now, what do you mean after 3 days, rise again? Well, something is going to happen, and then about 3 days later. And both in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, this is a general term. It does not literally mean 72 hours. It can mean a short period of time. It can mean parts of 3 days. And likely here in the context, what it means is from the time of the suffering begins. You might say the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed till he sweat like great drops of blood, and he began to suffer from that time until the resurrection was a short period of time, about 3 days. So he must be killed, and after 3 days, rise again, a resurrection. He spoke plainly, firmly, boldly, without ambiguity. He spoke plainly about this. And the disciples are again aghast and stunned. But someone's going to speak up. Can anyone guess who? Peter. So Peter takes him aside. That's a very condescending way to treat Jesus. Jesus, come over here. Let me straighten you out. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Hey, anybody want to rebuke Jesus? Peter begins to rebuke him. Obviously, Peter did not understand Messiah. He said, "You're the Messiah." But he did not understand the fullness of what that meant. So he disagrees now with Jesus' defeatist and morbid perspective and outlook on life. Oh, Jesus, come on, buck up, man. Don't be such a gloomy Gus. Hey, come on. We're not going to let anything happen to you. I'll take care of you, buddy. Don't be so negative. Verse 33. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, so if you can imagine the scene, Peter is kind of taking him aside now to rebuke him and chew him out and tell him how it's going to be. And Jesus turns around now and looks eyeball to eyeball with his disciples. And in front of all of them, he rebukes Peter. "Get behind me, Satan!" Whoa, I don't know about you, but I don't think I want Jesus to call me Satan. But he called Peter Satan. "Get behind me, Satan." And the word Satan literally means adversary, opponent, because Peter was in the spirit of the adversary. It was the adversary who, remember, in the temptation in the wilderness, who tried to get Jesus to forsake the cross and take over the kingdoms of the world now. Be the Messiah with no cross. That's the temptation. Be the Messiah with no cross. And Jesus was fully human. You got to understand what that meant. But he was going to go to the cross. And now here Peter, in the same spirit, is putting that same test and trial before him. Don't go to the cross. So he says, "Get behind me. You're my disciple." Disciples are to walk behind the rabbi. You be a disciple. You get behind me and follow me. That's the point. You get behind me and follow me, not the spirit of the adversary. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. You're thinking like the world thinks. You're thinking like the normal, selfish human with fallen human nature thinks. You're thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your goals. You're thinking about fame. You're thinking about conquest. You're thinking about victory. You're thinking about good things. You're just thinking about all the things that this world thinks about. You're not thinking about the will of God, the plan of God, what God wants. You're opposing the divine will because your mind is on the things of this world and worldly concerns. And you don't want to die. You don't want to die? Of course we don't want to die. But look, guess what? Everyone is going to die. I hope that doesn't come as a shock. Say, now, Dan, you're being the gloomy Gus. You're being the defeatist, but everyone is going to die. It's really a matter of when and what happens after. But Peter is only seeing the present. He's saying, Jesus, you're not going to die. I'm not going to let you die. I'm not going to let you suffer. I'm going to thwart the plan and will of God. And Jesus says, no, you're not. You're just thinking humanly about this, about the self. Verse 34, now he calls the crowd, wherever the crowd was, but he's been speaking to Peter and to the disciples, and now he invites the crowd to come and listen. And you can imagine that Peter is maybe telling Mark this story of how he remembers it happening, and Mark is writing it down. And Mark is also including this for his audience. Do you remember who his audience was? We think that Mark probably wrote from Italy, probably Rome. And in Rome, the Christians there were going through great suffering and persecution and hardship. And Mark, by telling them this story about Jesus, says, you know what? It's normal for a Christian to suffer. This is not something unusual. Jesus suffered. Jesus was persecuted. Jesus was executed. What we're going through here in Rome is not unusual for a follower of Jesus, someone who would do what Jesus did. And I think Mark hopes that will be encouraging to the Christians in Rome going through great persecution. So verse 34, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple. You notice that? Wants. It's free will. Anybody in here forced to be a disciple of Jesus? Did somebody twist your arm? Somebody hold a gun to your head? I want this. I want to be a disciple. Whoever wants to be my disciple, now he's going to give 3 points. You want to be his disciple? We all say yes. I see heads nodding. Yes. 3 points. 1, you must deny yourself. Renounce self-centeredness. You ever tried to do that? It's pretty hard to do. Renounce self-centeredness. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. And this uses the metaphor because the Roman practice was to take the condemned criminal and make them carry their own cross to the point of execution. What's your cross? What's my cross? We all have a cross. If we don't, we will. What are we going to do with it? I have to carry it. Carry your burden. Carry your suffering. Carry whatever it is you have to carry. You're going to have to carry it. But don't lie down on the job. Don't run away from it. You're going to have to carry that cross as Jesus did. Deny yourself, take up your cross. Point 3, follow me. Follow me. What would Jesus do? Follow him. Imitate Christ. Verse 35. For whoever wants to save their life, and now here's a play on words. The Greek word here is psyche, sometimes pronounced suke. You hear it in our English word psychology, psyche. Psychology is the study of life, one's personality, one's personhood, one's being. And it can mean your literal physical life, just your human life, but it can also mean who you are as a person, your personhood, the fullness of who you are, the true self, you might say. So, and it's here used in both ways, and you have to look at the context to see which nuance is there. But he says, for whosoever wants to save their life, their physical life, will lose it. Try to save your life, you're going to lose it. I'm sorry, it's inevitable. But whoever loses their life, their physical life, for me and for the gospel, for the preaching of the gospel, will save it. What's the it? Well, the it here is the true life, the true personhood, the true fullness of who you are as a human being in the image of God. You will save that. You may lose this physical existence temporarily, but you're going to save the true person, who you truly are. Save it for its ultimate and true purpose. Verse 36, and here comes the warning. You've heard me talk about a warning genre. And the purpose of a warning genre is not to threaten you or to say this is going to happen, but to warn you. And I've used the story before, but I have my prop here in person today, Stephen. If you remember the story of when Stephen was a little boy and there was a hot frying pan on the stove, and he started to reach for that hot frying pan to kind of tip it up and see what was in it. And I could just imagine him searing his hand and pouring the hot oil out all over him. And I screamed at him, "Stephen, stop that! You're going to burn your arm off!" Now, did I literally mean he was going to burn his arm off? No. But it was going to be pretty severe if he followed through on that action. So I screamed at him, not to make him do it, not to prophesy that was what was going to happen, but as a warning. And Stephen jumped back and started to cry. Well, yeah, his father had just screamed at him. But why did I scream at him? To save his life. And then I comforted him and told him I loved him. And he didn't have to suffer the consequences. That's called, to me, that's the warning genre that Jesus gives. It's not like this is a prophecy, or this is what's going to happen, or I'm threatening you. It's like I'm trying to save you. So don't do this. Don't go there. Don't let this happen. So he said, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world? What does he mean by that? What does the world want? Power, fame, wealth, sex, honor, recognition. What do you want? And so you gain it. So what? Where does that get you in the end? As Ecclesiastes says, animals die, so do humans. Where does that get you in the end? If you gain the whole world, yet forfeit, and the Greek word here translated forfeit means to trifle away. And yet you trifle away your soul. Here the translators try to give a nuance. It's the same Greek word, a nuance between life and your inner being. Soul, your suke. Who you truly are, your personhood, the real you, the totality of all that you are. Why do you want to serve this flesh and lose the totality of the true being that you are? Because this flesh is going to die. But the true being can live forever. So which is more important, satisfying the flesh or living according to the true being that God intended for us to be? Verse 37, or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? What's the price? What price do you want to place on your personhood, on who you truly are, on who God made you to be, on your, as they might say, eschatological life, your eternal life? If anyone who's trying to save their own physical life, if anyone is ashamed of me, has contempt, or disappointed, it can mean, in me and my words, in this adulterous and sinful generation. Now, he seems to be talking right then and there to that group. It applies to all of us as humans, but he seems to have a particular point of force to the group that is there then. In this adulterous, what's adulterer? You know what an adulterer is? An adulterer is a covenant breaker. When you get married, you make a covenant. You're an adulterer, you break the covenant. God made a covenant with ancient Israel. They broke it. They're an adulterous generation. They always break their covenant with God. You can't trust them. Then this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man, that great glorious being who will come in the future to save his people from persecution, the Son of Man will be ashamed. I think that means disappointed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with his holy angels and the final judgment. Do you notice here he doesn't say will be rejected? You notice here he doesn't say condemned to hell. You know what he says? He says, I'm going to be ashamed. I'm going to be sorry. I'm going to be disappointed for you in the choices that you have made. You have given up everything for a bowl of soup. Did you catch the reference? You've given up everything for a bowl of porridge. You've thrown away so much. I am so sorry for your choice that this is what you want rather than what I want for you. Very powerful warning here. So how do we want to live our lives? Do you and I really want to do what Jesus did? WWJD, do we really want to do what Jesus did? Jesus did many great and wonderful things, miracles, healings, teachings, helping people. But ultimately, for all he did, what happened to him? He suffered and he died. That's the cost of discipleship. Do you really want to follow Jesus? Well, that's what it's going to cost. That's the cost of being a follower of Jesus. Now, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, we are saved by grace. But grace demands a response. There is no grace without the cross. Yes, grace, but you know what? It took the cross, suffering, death, to bring grace. There is no grace without Jesus resurrected, living, incarnate. What is the response? The response is to love God and to love other people over yourself. God, others, self. That's what Jesus did. Wow, that's easier said than done. When Christ calls someone, he bids them, follow me. Come and die. Come and die. This is not suicide. It's death of the self. It's the abandonment of attachment to this world and to all this world deems important. It's the struggle of the flesh versus the spirit. It is the no to self, no to letting the fleshly desires of lust, power, recognition, wealth rule one's life. And you know what? That struggle, I don't know about you, but I find it very, very difficult. It's not an easy way to live. You know, you think, well, if I didn't know God, and I didn't love God, and I didn't know what was right, I'd just go out and I'm going to party. Let's go, man. Let's do whatever I feel like. I'm going to do whatever I want. And if you got some money lying on the table, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the park.
I'm going to take everything you have and get it from me, and I'm going to do whatever I feel like doing, yeah. But you're a follower of Jesus, and so you say, no. No, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to act like that. Yes, my flesh pulls me that way. Oh, you disrespected me? I'm going to pop you in the nose. Who am I? I deserve disrespect. Who do I think I am? Love your enemies, Jesus said. Do good to those who despitefully use you. Wow. That's not easy to do. It's easier to get your feelings hurt and to feel neglected and disrespected and unappreciated and poor while others have stuff. It's not right. It's what we say. And yet, what do we deserve? Death. It's not easy to say no to self. It's a very painful struggle But as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, we have committed ourselves to that struggle. The spirit against the flesh. It's always putting God and others before self-interest. It's a willingness, listen, church, to pluck out your eye. Remember the reference? It's a willingness to pluck out your eye if your eye causes you to stumble. It's having found the pearl of great price and being willing to let go of every worldly thing in order to have it. It's willingness to leave your nets. Remember what Jesus said to his first disciples, the fishermen? It's being willing to leave your nets, to leave your business, your job, your finances, your family, if necessary, and follow Jesus. And when the path of following Jesus seems too hard and uneasy to navigate, it means keeping your eyes on Jesus and following him no matter what.
Then I will now baptize you. Press any key to continue.
Yes, it is a path that's going to lead you to suffering because it goes against your very fallen nature. And it's painful. It's a path that leads to suffering and even to death, a path of denying the self and denying the enticement of worldly pleasures, and eventually it leads to death. But you know what? Here's the thing. Chances are everyone's going to suffer. Whether you're a Christian or not, I mean, the chances are you're going to suffer. And everyone is going to die. I had a friend in high school. He went on to be a professor of biomolecular genetics. A pretty smart guy. And he was an atheist, and I was a believer. But I said to him one day, I said, so what happens to you when you die? He said, well, I just go back into the elements from which I'm made, and that's it. I said, that's it, right? That's what you have to look forward to? He said, you know what, I'm a Christian. I believe in heaven. I believe in the new heavens and new earth. I believe in eternal life. I believe in joy forever. Now, you've got a 50-50 chance of being right. I got a 50-50 chance of being right. But you know what? I like my right a whole lot better than yours. My options are so much better than yours. How stupid am I? He didn't have much of an answer for that. It's not a matter of, are you going to die? It's a matter of what happens then. What happens then? The Christian has a sure hope for the future. We have hope. It's not a temporary time of worldly pleasure and self-gratification that passes away. But for the Christian, we believe there's a coming time of eternal joy with eternal life. For the Christian, just as with Jesus, we walk as he walked, we do what Jesus did, and are we going to suffer as Jesus did? Yes. Are we going to die as Jesus did? Yes. But are we going to be resurrected as Jesus was? Yes. Are we going to ascend to the right hand of the Father in heaven? Yes. So yeah, there's suffering and even death. But it's what happens next that really matters. Do you and I really want to do what Jesus did? Are we willing to suffer and die? Are we willing to take up our cross and follow him and look forward toward the resurrection? Our answer to the question, what would Jesus do? What's our answer? What would Jesus do? Do you want to do what Jesus did? How do you answer that question? I'd say we answer it yes. Amen. Amen. I want to do what Jesus did, and I want to follow him now and follow him forever. So my words for all of us here today is, let's all do what Jesus